going to talk through some notes I put together just about what CVs are for, how you can structure them. I don't have a strong sense of how useful this will be for people. I think there's kind of a variety of different career stages and like career trajectories in the room. So so I've kind of it's probably it's kind of focused around creating a CV for academic purposes, so for jobs in academia or grants in academia, fellowships, those kinds of things. And it is, I've written it and I do philosophy, so it's, you know, it's kind of tailored a little bit towards philosophy, but I think would be somewhat more broadly useful, and it's also probably represents the norms in UK academia to some extent, and will extrapolate a bit elsewhere, but not entirely. So those are some kind of caveats to bear in mind, and also just in terms of saying that there's a variety of skills and knowledge in the room. Please do contribute your thoughts on this if you disagree, or I'm very interested to hear what people think. Don't know if this is particularly visible for you guys, but I will get Rocky to send around a copy of this to the grad discussion list anyway, so you can see it. I did find a link to the Oxford Careers website, which also has some advice on academic CVs, and so that would just be another resource that you could look at. But obviously there's quite a lot online about how to kind of best craft your CV and get it to do the work that you want it to do. So as I mentioned, CVs for applying for jobs, fellowships, grant applications. Sometimes you need to use them to report to funders, to tell them kind of what work you've been doing. They're also just a really useful way of keeping a record of what you've done. So you need to tailor your CV for whatever purpose it's going to serve on a particular instance. And the way I do it, so this is what I'm recommending, but if people have better ways of doing it, then I'd be very eager to hear them. I kind of keep a master CV that I just have everything in, and like it doesn't still have my cycling proficiency certificate listed on it, but it has like really almost everything I've done since I started university. So I kind of keep everything on there, and then when I need to submit a CV for some other purpose, I will kind of go through it and take out the stuff that's not really relevant. And I think there will be much better ways of doing this than having a Word file where you keep everything. So my partner uses R Markdown. So he uses a particular software that enables him to kind of keep everything there, and then you can use some particular ways of like putting in the code where it will just like grey out whole areas of the CV. I cannot be bothered to learn how to use that software. Like I probably should. It would probably be a worthwhile investment, but so far I haven't done that. But there might also be other software out there that allows you to do that kind of thing that could be quite useful. But the kind of crude approach of just having a Word document that's got everything in it, to be honest, sort of works pretty much okay. On that, I recommend always submitting a CV as like a PDF or something, because the formatting always goes really weird, and it's often quite important in a CV. I use Pages rather than Word to work in, so I always have to export the file before I'm sending it to anyone. So I will just always export it to a PDF, always submit it as a PDF. So one thing that I think is just so important, and I expect you already know it in the context of making CVs, is just being really clear. So I have sat on search committees, hiring committees for jobs, and there's a real curse of knowledge that goes on in the context of people preparing their CVs. So they kind of assume that the person reading it knows what they're talking about, knows what the applicant already knows. But you've got to assume the person reading your CV really is clueless about your experience and what you've done. And particularly if you're applying for a job, say, or a grant or a fellowship in another country, be really mindful about what they will know about how things work in your country. So I inherit this privilege of just living my entire academic life within the UK, and not really applying for things overseas, and not having to do that much translation. So generally people do know what I'm talking about when I talk about like my degree getting a 2-1 or something like that is meaningful to people who exist within UK academia. But if you're applying from the US, say, and you're talking about grade point averages, people might not know what you're talking about, that might not be obvious to them. And they will, if they're really conscientious, they will go away and like look that up and try and figure out what it means, like how strong your performance was at undergraduate, or you know, the kind of Latin honors that you might get on a degree program in the US or something. Like people won't necessarily know what that is, and there will be examples from other countries as well. So if it's at all possible, then translate it into, make it meaningful for the person that CV is for. Do the work for them so that they know what you're talking about, and they can kind of understand how impressive your performance has been. So formatting is really important on CVs. So don't make it really crowded. Academic CVs can be as long as they need to be. So there is no like 2-page rule for an academic CV. It can be really, really long. They often are. Occasionally a funder or a hiring committee will specify that they want you just to submit like a 1-page CV or something like that. And then obviously you need to stick to those rules. And in those cases, some of the advice around formatting would you know, need to be adapted. But typically you can just make it as long as you want. Do not include a photo on your CV. I think this is something that differs hugely across countries and across professions. So a friend of mine is an engineer, and he was like, wow, it's completely normal to include a photo on a CV in engineering. And he finds it really, it makes him pay more attention. Like he feels like there's a real person when he's hiring. There's a real person who he owes some kind of obligation to make sure he like considers them carefully. In academia, it feels like you're trying to sway someone by including a photo, or it feels inappropriate in some sense or informal. It's just really, really not done, at least in UK, US, I think, Australian academia probably. Like, clearly there are some places where it is normal to include a photo on a CV, but here it's not, and you shouldn't do it. And I kind of checked with other people about that as well, right? Like I was like, is it? Because and everyone was like, yeah, no, definitely don't include photos on CVs. Font size, 11 or 12, generous line spacing. Don't use loads of different fonts. I don't know if people need to be told this, but don't use loads of different fonts. Like my friend calls it font apocalypse. Like it's just really horrible to look at. You want something that's kind of looks calm, looks like it's got the information you need. It's not kind of making you squint. Use section headings, you know, think carefully about what those sections are, what's contained within them, what you're trying to communicate within them. I think the best single piece of advice is just to find a good CV and copy it. So I have tried to do that at various points in time. I'm sure my CV could do with a kind of a revamp. But that's definitely what I did when I was a PhD student. It can be hard to look at someone else's CV because they always seem much more impressive than you are. But that's what a really good CV will do, is just present the person in the best possible light without lying or misleading. It will shepherd you towards the useful, good information about that person, and show their kind of skills and their expertise really effectively, really efficiently, and make that really easy for the reader. So finding people who've done that well is a really good idea. So unfortunately I can't now say, here is the CV that you should copy, here's a great CV. I think that So a friend of mine, when I was a PhD student, had a friend whose CV was on their academia.edu site, and she sent me the link to her and said, look at Emily's CV, it's really good. And I did, and it was. And so I copied that CV. So I think kind of asking friends and colleagues if you can see their CV or if they know any examples of a really good CV, it's particularly helpful. I think if the person whose CV you're looking at is at a like roughly comparable career stage to you, so that the kinds of sections they're including are the sorts of things that you would want to include. So, you know, Neil Levy or Junior Savulescu or Roger Chris will all have phenomenal CVs, but it's not that helpful to be trying to copy the CV of someone who's, you know, a very experienced professor, who's the director of a center, who has like all of these management responsibilities and things like that. If you're kind of just entering the profession and are trying to, you know, show a different set of skills and apply for a different set of things. So your CV obviously will fill up over time. Like I think kind of early on it feels a bit empty, and yeah, it's you won't need all of the different subsections. That over time it will kind of make sense to divide things up a little bit more. So what should be on your CV? Maybe I'll kind of open up my CV at the same time, and then we can I'll make this as small as I can, and you can see the CV. And then it kind of makes a bit more sense just to kind of go through it. So it's really helpful to have your name. People need to know it. Kind of contact details. If at all possible, I would put your kind of academic affiliation or something on here. It just looks more professional. Academic email address if you have one. If you're in a situation where you're kind of coming to the end of a PhD or a postdoc, then you should see if you can get kind of an extension to your academic email address, get an honorary contract if it's all possible, so that you can keep using that email address whilst you're applying for other things if you need to. Website, if you've got a website. Areas of specialty, areas of competence, that's what AOS and AOC stand for. So this is where you would list the things that you're kind of really pretty good at, things that your kind of research focus is on, and then areas of competence would be kind of broader areas that you are maybe happy to teach in, but not actively publishing on. You can tailor these depending on what you're applying for. Be more or less ambitious in terms of what you put down there. I think that is fairly specific to philosophy, having AOS and AOC, but I'm not sure. My partner's a psychologist and he was like, no, we don't do that. So employment, so start with the most recent thing first. I've done something here where I used to list every single, because I've been at the Uehiro Centre for quite a while now. I started in 2017, and I used to kind of list every single contract that I had, but it looked very, very busy. So what I've tried to do is just have one thing, like March 2017 to present, and you know, this is my place of work. And then I kind of give a bit more detail of the different kind of roles within that I've done. So all that is just an example of trying to make it a little bit easier for the reader. So however that might apply for your CV, you can kind of think it through. But that's what I did there, because otherwise it was this like barrage of different jobs, and I had like a college affiliation and kind of various things like that. And I thought it was really unhelpful. It's a really good idea to include any career breaks that you've had on your CV. I put them kind of in my employment record, but some people have a separate section where they describe them. Okay, so after employment would normally come education, and again, most recent first. I should say in the employment stuff, I would normally include a little bit of detail about those jobs, what was involved in them. Again, tailor that to what you're applying to. Next up is publications. So this is where thinking about how to section the description is kind of useful and important. So I have as my first section peer-reviewed journal articles. I think if I had a monograph, then that would be probably the thing that I would list first. You kind of go with your highest value things first. I have, however, not written any books as of yet. So that is not a section that I have. So it's peer-reviewed journal articles. If you have quite a lot, and some are really a lot more valuable than others, so kind of first author articles in really decent journals, then it might be worth having a kind of key publications section right at the beginning where you kind of list the ones that you really want to highlight. Because they can kind of get lost in the crowd. If someone's like skimming through the CV, then they might not see the ones that you really want them to see. I also kind of bold my name so that people can see where I am in the author order. And just include the bibliographic information. Just doesn't really matter what kind of style you choose to use, but just keep it consistent. Journal articles. I have another little section, editorially reviewed journal articles, which is a bit crapper than peer-reviewed journal articles. But I want to include them on my CV, but I don't want to be misleading people about the kind of level of review they were subjected to. So it's important. I mean, it's important not to lie on your CV, right? I mean, just as a principle, we shouldn't be lying, but also you might well be found out if there's someone that kind of knows about it. And one thing, this came up in a previous grad discussion group, Tom raised one thing that he sometimes has seen is people including, what are they? The American Journal of Bioethics has the kind of peer commentaries. Now those aren't peer reviewed. They do need to pass kind of editorial acceptance, but they're not peer reviewed. And he's kind of seen people including them in their kind of journal articles list in a way that looks like it's trying to trick people into thinking that they're peer reviewed. And it's not necessarily the case that the person is trying to trick people. They might just not realize that that's a relevant distinction. Or they might possibly have not realized that it wasn't subject to peer review. They got really lucky and the reviewers had no comments. But just be aware of that there is a distinction between these things, and don't try and kind of get more value out of things than they're really worth. I've heard different things about having a kind of manuscripts in preparation, manuscripts in submission sections. I include it. Some people say, oh, it's worthless until it's published, but I don't think anyone's likely to hold it against you if you include it. I think they'll just ignore it. I think it can be nice, particularly if you've got like a revise and resubmit from a good journal, then that's meaningful. To me, that's meaningful. It's not meaningful to have a list of 20 different papers that you're definitely going to write. Yeah. So be realistic. I would only, again, this is something that perhaps on my master CV, I would have like a bit of a longer list. And then if I'm actually submitting that somewhere, I might think, come on now, what's it plausible to include here? Are you really writing these papers? It's sad when you have to start deleting them, but that's the reality. Okay, so then book chapters, encyclopedia entries. I don't know, I just created that category because I have one, and I don't know if it's essential. So so these things are really important. So like publications, showing that you've got an education, showing your kind of career record. Those are important to have. Like you have them kind of near the beginning of your CV, and you try and make them as clear as possible and kind of legible to the reader. Something like blogs is kind of an optional extra. Obviously, you might not be writing blogs. We in the Uehiro Institute are asked to regularly contribute to the blog here. So I kind of have a section for that. Other publications, I don't know what that's about. Manuscripts in preparation. So I've actually separated manuscripts in submission from manuscripts in preparation. I think I did that on here because I had something accepted to Ratio, which is like a decent philosophy journal, and I kind of wanted to highlight that, and I didn't want to hide it in a kind of manuscripts in preparation section right at the bottom. But if it wasn't for that, I would probably just include everything under one section. Okay, next thing would be presentations. So I separate this out into invited academic talks first, because they're slightly more prestigious. So if you have any invited talks, then I would put those first. And then I just have other academic talks. I think you can separate it out into like kind of ones where it was like a competitive, you had to submit an abstract to a conference, it was kind of screened in some sense, versus, sorry, but the grad discussion group where all you have to do is just ask, can you present? Like, I think some people kind of make that distinction. So that might be something that you could consider doing. You can start deleting these. Like, I kind of keep it, because I've got 2 pages, I've got 1 page of each. So just sort of, for me, that's what I often include. It's a fairly arbitrary decision, but just from a formatting perspective, it kind of looks quite nice. I do have more talks than this, but I sort of cut them down based on the formatting. I mean, there's talks on here that I don't know if anyone cares that I, in 2010, during my PhD, subjected some of my fellow students to talking about like a very early version, and the risk of including this stuff is that it kind of bogs down the CV a bit. And when you're trying to get across the important things and informing the reader of like your strengths as an academic researcher, then you don't want to distract them. You don't want to make, again, you don't want to make them work for it. So don't provide them with other information that's kind of distracting from that. So if there's, provide, I kind of like the 2 pages because I think you can glance at it and you can be like, okay, this person is an academic who's been around for a while, has given kind of plenty of talks. But I think anything beyond that would start to just be like, well, what is all this kind of thing? Okay, teaching. This is one of the bits that I tend to see done most poorly, I think, in academic CVs. And I think it's this like curse of knowledge thing. So it's kind of hard to get to grips with what courses exist and what this person is contributing. Because often people do a bit of teaching across lots of different courses and there's different subjects. And they kind of want to tell you what those subjects are, what they have expertise in. So I think thinking, if you have done teaching, when you're at the stage where you've accumulated a bit of teaching experience, thinking really carefully about how to present that. So I rejigged this a few times. I've kind of settled on something where I have a little summary paragraph at the beginning to kind of just give an idea of what my teaching experience is. And then I separate it out, first of all, by institution. And then within that, by undergraduate versus graduate teaching. And then I've kind of got the details within there. And, what I aim to do is to give enough information so they know what's going on without giving too much information. So it's kind of becomes distracting and kind of laborious to go through it. Again, like it's fine to leave things off a CV. So if you've got some really impressive, really meaningful teaching, then you might just want to include that and kind of not include all of the kind of extra bits and pieces of experience that you have. I think sometimes it's definitely worth including if you have experience designing courses, like even if that's kind of contributing, like supporting someone in designing a course. If you've got experience in assessment, that can often be kind of valuable and important. So I do, on my CV, I do kind of include that here. Some people would have a separate section that's just like assessment, course assessment, or experience of assessment or something. So you could do it kind of separately if you wanted. But those are the kind of skills that they might be looking at. And obviously, if you're kind of thinking carefully about this teaching section, then that's more for job applications where you would be doing some teaching than other kinds of applications. So if you're if your CV is being sent to a grant funder or for a fellowship application, then you might want to think about how much of a kind of teaching section you include. I would normally still include it, but I might well include a much shortened version of it. So that's, again, just the kind of the tailoring is something to think about. Engagement sections, I think this is kind of generally now often something that philosophy departments value, and there's no fixed way of presenting this, kind of laying it out. So I'm just using my CV as the example here, but I'm sure other people do it differently. So I've done a few kind of interviews with newspapers and radio and TV, and I kind of have kind of divided them up by topic. So the different kinds of things that I've discussed on those, and then included some podcasts and videos, and then kind of talks and presentations. These are kind of public talks. I think this is, for this stuff, this is where the CV, just as a place to keep a record of what you've done, becomes really important. So you're not going to forget your publications, like and you can also go and check, like they're there on Google Scholar or whatever. But if you gave a very brief interview with Jack FM or something 2 years ago, then it's going to be, if you don't write that down and remember it, then it's just going to be lost.
Unless people listen to it.
Yeah, you might listen to it, but going around and asking people, it's probably a fairly laborious way of trying to remember what kind of media engagement you've done. So do try and, when you've done something that you think is worth keeping a record of, like go put it in your CV, even if you don't format it properly and whatever at the time, just kind of note it down and keep a record of it. Because it is quite nice to be able to say that you've done, in my case, like having done some interviews with like BBC Radio or something, it's nice to be able to say that, like it's not a huge deal, but kind of being able to kind of show that I have some experience of that kind of media engagement, I think is quite useful. Policy engagement, again, there's kind of more and less meaningful versions. All I've really done is these kind of submissions of written evidence to consultations, which aren't actually, anyone can do that, right? So it's not, like that doesn't mean they paid any attention to those submissions or it's had any impact on policy. If I had some more kind of meaningful engagement where I could show that I'd actually influenced policy in some way or could kind of point to changes in policy, then I would absolutely be putting that up front and making that really obvious to the reader. So if you, again, within each of these subsections, think about the most valuable things that you've done and how you can really highlight that and make that really clear to the reader. Prizes, awards, grants, give a little description of what they are. If you got money, then say how much money you got. Again, be honest here, don't kind of mislead or lie, but think carefully, because you might think, oh, I haven't got any grants or awards, but there's sort of sometimes you've got some money for travel funding or something, and actually that was from, a kind of a pot of money that there was a competitive process to apply for it, and you were, your attendance at that conference was considered sufficiently worthwhile for someone to pay a few £100 or a couple of £1,000 for you to attend. So kind of think through those things, because it's sometimes surprising what you might remember and can include on your CV. Conference and event organisation, if you've done anything like that, include it. Academic activities and memberships. This is where I kind of put down kind of being an editor at journals. You might not have experience as an editor, but you might well be a referee for various journals, so you can include that there. Again, the kind of more impressive the journal, the better to some extent. So, you know, I could probably slim this down a little bit if I had loads and just include, you know, the kind of more the more selective philosophical journals or something. That's the end of my CV. What else did I include on this long list? Departmental and university service. I think this is slightly more common on kind of US based CVs, including things like service, but you can include, so if you sit on a research committee, if you have particular administrative roles, training and skills that you have done. So things like teaching qualifications, you can include those. You might want to include those in the kind of teaching section if you have them. I don't have any of those things, so that's why they're not on my CV. Languages, again, I speak English and that is it. So I have no details of all the many other languages that I speak in my CV, but including languages and your proficiency is kind of standard. Nationality, I think I was getting some of these suggestions from the Oxford University website. So nationality might be relevant to right to work in particular cases. So I think sometimes that's relevant to include on your CV. Some people include details of people who are willing to provide them with references. So I don't include this. I don't think it's appropriate for referees to be contacted unless you've told them that you're applying for something and you're going to put them down as a referee, if that's okay. You might have someone who agrees to just be named as a kind of general referee on your CV and is willing to be contacted at any point in time, but you know, clear that with them if you want to do that. I guess for some people it might be a bit of a flex. They might have some really famous people who are acting as their referee and they want to be able to put their names on their CV. So that might be the reason that some people include it. But it's almost always the case that when you are submitting a CV to something, they're going to ask you for the names of a couple of referees anyway, and that will, you know, applications are almost entirely online now, and they will normally just have a page where they ask you to put in the contact details of your references. So including them on your CV is superfluous to requirements from that point of view. So I just never do it. Not an academic work, I think it's fine to include it on your CV if it's relevant. So kind of listing jobs that you had as a teenager, you know, is not a good idea. But listing kind of jobs that are in sectors that kind of enhance your academic work or give you particular insight or additional skills, then I think it is worth including those. Or if it explains a particular kind of gap in your career history or something as well, then that might be important to do. Don't use acronyms. I'm just really opposed to acronyms. Like every single year I get worse about acronyms and I just really hate them in like almost all instances. But people don't know what your acronyms stand for, and you do, and you will forget that you haven't explained it. So I think just steering clear of acronyms, if at all possible, is a really good idea. Again, you know, there are sometimes you'll ask for a really, really restricted length CV or something, and you might need to write out, you know, the Oxford Uehiro Centre for Practical Ethics. And I think in that circumstance, it is forgivable to, you know, just define it and then put OUC and then use OUC throughout. But for maybe one acronym, but in general, just don't use it. You're trying to make it easy for the reader, and acronyms only help the writer, not the reader. Narrative CVs, I don't really have anything to say about this. I've never done one, and I looked at this. So there's a web page that Oxford University has part of their research support services about developing narrative CVs, and they have guidance on there, and they kind of explain what they are. I'm sure there are other resources as well. What I've written down here, prompt descriptions of contributions and achievements, allowing researchers to reflect a broader range of skills and experiences. Like I just don't really know what narrative CVs, I don't know what the deal is here, but apparently they are becoming a bit more common, and funders, I believe, are sometimes starting to ask for narrative CVs. So it might be something that you need to think about at some point. I am in no way in a position to give you any advice on them, because I've never done one and I don't really know what they are. But just to warn you that they might be a thing. Maybe someone here has anyone here done a narrative CV?
I haven't done one, but I've attended a talk, because I think they are becoming more common, and there was some training, a talk thing about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think there are various courses offered by the called the graduate school or talk that
Yeah.
you can go to kind of train you in how to write one. It looks quite overwhelming.
Yeah.
The bit of the talk that I listened to was like, oh, this looks like a lot of work.
Yeah. Yeah. I was looking at it and there were like these different sections, and it did seem like a lot of work. And
Yeah, I was like, I'm gonna write one of them.
yeah, it's kind of, yeah, the position that I adopted as well. Brilliant. Does anyone have any questions or any kind of contributions about how they approach doing CVs? Any kind of advice they would like to share? Nope. Brilliant. Okay, well, in that case, we can finish 15 minutes early.